Brian Barnett is just a regular guy. He's not a doctor. He has no legal license in any field of mental or emotional health. Brian Barnett merely shares the insights he's gained from his personal experiences for anybody who may choose to use such information as he or she personally chooses, while accepting full responsibility for his or her own individual thoughts, feelings, behaviors, and actions. Brian Barnett assumes no responsibility whatsoever for anybody's individual choice to expose himself or herself to any information that Brian Barnett shares, and by listening to this program, you're acknowledging that you, and only you, are responsible for your own thoughts, feelings, and actions.
Happy Thursday, everybody. Welcome back to The Last Symptom. I'm Brian Barnett, your creator and host. Not your creator and host, but the creator and host of The Last Symptom. So happy to have you back here with me again this week. Maybe you're here for the very first time, and if that's true, a big welcome to you. I'm very happy to have you with me. Of course, just a real quick, brief rundown on my story is that I had borderline personality disorder completely unaware for the first 35 years of my life, and now I don't. How did I get there from there to here? Well, that's what the Last Symptom work is all about. It's all about helping people authentically rid themselves of their own emotional disorders. It might be borderline personality disorder, it might be something else, but that's what we're here for. Last week was quite a heavy topic. We talked about suicide, and in fact, I warned a lot of people that if the timing wasn't right for that discussion for you personally, not to listen to the show. Go take care of that first and those sorts of ideations, and then come back and listen to the show when you're more ready. So what I thought I would do this week is maybe talk about some lighter things. So with that in mind, what sorts of things are we going to talk about this week? Well, let me give you a quick review of the topics we're going to talk about. It's going to be kind of a smorgasbord or a potpourri of different topics. I'm going to tell you about a man who collected a single brick in his lunchbox for years. We're going to talk about trust. I'm going to share a quote with you by Isaac Asimov that is useful for us, I reckon, as far as being people who are trying to stop the inertia of the direction of our own lives in a certain sense, And anyway, I thought you'd find it interesting. We'll talk about some students in my daughter's class that I have noticed and kind of analyze them. I want to share a really nice message I got from somebody this week. And want to talk to you about false dilemmas. Have you ever heard of that term? Do you know what a false dilemma is? Well, we'll talk about that. Have you ever heard of the term geodesics? Do you know what geodesics are? Well, it's interesting. It was something I thought I might share with you because I found it interesting. Let's see what else. We'll talk about getting to know yourself for real. And we'll use water as a good example for this. How much do you know about water? Water is something that, what have you consumed more than water? Nothing. So we might assume that we know water pretty well, but do you? We'll find out. I want to share a quote with you from the movie that I just saw recently with Nicolas Cage called Pig. What a great movie that was. I personally thought it was a really great movie. Do you remember old Sam worked in the cemetery? And I've talked about him in the past. He always come into the monument company there where I worked with his beer drinking glove. That's what he called it, his beer drinking glove. And it was just this glove that he would always carry around so that he could hold his beer without getting his hand cold. If people are like the weather, why should we be concerned if others think they're happy but they're not happy, or why should we observe other people or make comparisons at all and contrasts at all? Is it any of our business? Does it matter? Well, we'll talk about that. I'm going to tell you a story about Arizona and horses. A true story that happened to me. We're going to talk about ultimatums versus boundaries. We're going to talk about perceived confirmations that are not really confirmations of anything. And finally, I have a campfire story for you all today. And it's a true story. It's the time that I experienced an honest to God lucid dream. Not kind of a lucid dream, but an actual honest to God, totally lucid dream. And I'm going to share the details of that with you to close out the show. So before we get into everything, let me give you the announcements. First of all, I need to tell you about thelastsymptom.com. thelastsymptom.com. That's my website full of free resources. There are also some paid services there. For example, you can schedule for my time to have one-on-one phone conversations with me or one-on-one Zoom video conversations with me. And probably most importantly, there's the Last Symptom Fundamentals course. It's a 2-week intensive course. Now, I can understand a person being nervous about, enrolling in something they don't really know what it's all about and all that stuff. But let me assure you, it's no different than signing up for like an online pre-recorded college course. You're going to have a professor there talking, sharing images to drive his points home, notes. He might be using a whiteboard or something like that. Well, that's what the Last Symptom Fundamentals course is, except for instead of having a highfalutin college professor, you're going to have me there presenting the whole thing. And basically, I go through everything you could possibly need to know to set down your own foundation of accurate, solid insights so that you can continue to build upon that and authentically recover from borderline personality disorder or some other emotional disorder for yourself. The program is also very nice as well for those who might not have an emotional disorder but know somebody who does. If you'd like to understand thoroughly what it is they're dealing with, why they behave the way they do, why their emotions are the way they are, and things like that, then the course would be just as useful for you as well. Now, on to today's discussion. I heard about this, I don't know, maybe 20 years ago, but it was a story somebody told about a man who worked near a brickyard, so where they would make bricks. And the brickyard was closed off by a fence. He had one of those old metal tin lunch boxes, like the old timers used to use, kind of like oval on top, the ones I'm talking about. So every day when he would get out of work, he would have to walk by this brickyard. And he realized that every day that he was walking past this fence of this brickyard, that over the course of the day, several bricks that were being unloaded or I don't know what would fall over the fence. They'd end up on the other side of the fence. So he got the notion every day to just pick up one of those bricks on his way home. And he would store that in his empty lunchbox and walk home with that brick. If memory serves me right, when I heard about this, it was presented as an honest-to-God true story. So I'm assuming that it was a true story. And before I did started the show today or anything like that, I didn't do any research online to see if I could find a true example of this, but I just wanted to keep it pure from my memory, when I heard this told to me. So the guy did this for like 20 years, or something like that. Every day he'd come home and he would It would just become a routine for him. He would pick up one brick, put it in his lunchbox, carry that home. And do you know that when he retired, he had one of the nicest brick homes built than anybody in the entire area or neighborhood. And he had to pay nothing for the bricks. So basically, except for labor and stuff like that, maybe other materials that he needed to buy, basically because of his insight and willingness to just collect one brick every day for 20 years or something like that, he was able to build a brick home and pay absolutely nothing for the bricks. So it was almost like getting a big, beautiful brick home for free. What this makes me think about are you folks who are worried about experiencing authentic recovery from some emotional disorder overnight. That's not reasonable. It's not, it just ain't a reasonable expectation. It took me 7 years, as I've told you many, many times. And I like to think of myself as that guy just collecting one brick every afternoon on my way home from work. That is kind of the nature of it. And I've told you in the past that the years are going to go by anyway. So there's no sense in getting discouraged by the amount of time it might take you. It might take you, hopefully it'll take you a lot less than it took me. That's the whole reason I do this work, is to try to cut down on the time that you have to spend. But if it doesn't happen as soon as you'd like it to, there's no reason to get discouraged. You got to think of yourself as that man, patiently, wisely collecting a brick and putting it in his lunchbox every day. The time is going to go by. These things accumulate and add up. The important thing is that you are picking up that brick every single day, patiently and with endurance. You have to consider too that picking up one brick is a very manageable thing to do. Just one brick a day. You're walking by there anyway. You're carrying an empty lunchbox in your hand anyway, right? So it's not like this guy had to kill himself to accomplish such an impressive thing. He just did a little bit each day. That accumulated over time. And think about how proud he was to finally build that house when the time was right. So I hope you find that encouraging, and that you find some parallels that you can apply that to in your own life. Let me ask you, what do you think about somebody who excessively tells you how trustworthy they are, even when you haven't asked? Do you find that a little suspicious? Somebody who feels compelled to tell you time and again that they are trustworthy. You can trust them. I promise. You can trust me. I don't lie. I don't lie to people. I promise I don't. And you haven't even asked. You ever find that suspicious? You don't have to convince people of anything that ain't even in question to begin with. That's the thing. It's like, look, I swear to you, to all you listening to me right now, I swear, you have to believe me that I have 5 fingers on my hand. I swear I do. Please believe me. Why would I be compelled to do this if I just know that it's true? If it's not in question, right? If it's not in question, then why would I be compelled at all to feel the need to try to convince you of that? I wouldn't. Now contrast this with you looking in the fridge at work and saying, hey, I can't find my sandwich that I put in here. Now imagine me going, hey, I didn't eat your sandwich. I swear I didn't. You can believe, listen, lots of other people might have eaten your sandwich, but it wasn't me. I swear to God it wasn't. I swear on Granny's grave, I did not eat your sandwich. You gotta believe me. Wouldn't you find that kind of curious? If I didn't steal your sandwich, then why am I acting as if I did? So it kind of reminds me, I've noticed here lately, all the news organizations. Have you guys noticed this? What is all their advertising built around right now? Every one of their ads built around them telling you just how trustworthy they are in every single ad. If it's a news channel or if it's a newspaper or anything like that, the advertising is all built around just how trustworthy they are. Oh, they're so trustworthy. They're the most trustworthy. Their whole mission statement is all built around being trustworthy and all this stuff. Would they need to do that if their trust was not in question to begin with? I mean, if you're trustworthy, you don't really feel the compulsion to go around telling everybody how trustworthy you are, do you? And here's the interesting thing to me. You know, it's like you having a stinker of a house that you want to put up for sale. The house has all kinds of problems. It's dirty, it's ugly, it's just a nasty house. You could spend your time and attention making improvements to that house, so that then when you take pictures of it, the pictures show what a beautiful house it is for real. But the news organizations right now seem to me like somebody who has a big stinker of a house that they want to put up for sale, but instead of spending their time and attention on just honestly improving the house so that the pictures they take of it then reflect that it is a pretty house, instead of doing that, it'd be like you spending $10,000 for a photographer who can just make the house look like it ain't a stinker of a house. Have you folks noticed that too? Because these news organizations, after telling you how much you can trust them in every single ad, you tune into them, and within 5 minutes you see that they're not trustworthy at all. So they're like that stinker of a house that's just had nice pictures taken of it. That they're more interested in making you believe they're trustworthy than just being trustworthy, which seems to me like would be much more effective and easier, to be honest with you. All right, here's a quote from the book Foundation by Isaac Asimov. Now, I know that Apple TV has licensed this and has made a series based on Foundation by Isaac Asimov. It was one of the greatest books ever written, and they just botched the whole thing. It's terrible. They completely they took this work, this genius work of masterful writing and storytelling and this masterful premise, and they just totally have ruined it down to like a pop song. Yeah, like a Justin Bieber pop song. That's what they've done to it. So that's kind of distressing to me, but it goes with the territory, you know. There was nobody who was more excited for the movie I Am Legend to come out, because that book is one of my favorite books of all time. I'm telling you, it's probably in the top 3 of my favorite books of all time. And one thing I remember about that, it's the only book ever that I've ever read, and I read it while I was still married to my ex-wife Diana. She went to bed a lot earlier than I ever did, and she wanted me in bed with her, even if we were just going to be sleeping. But I would stay up and read, and so I remember I was staying up and reading I Am Legend by Richard Matheson. So I was reading that book in bed with her. Had no idea what it was about when I started reading it. Can't even remember why I started reading it, but somehow it got my attention and I started reading that book. And there was a section in the book where these vampires come out from under the houses and everything. The protagonist, he's been going out to a cemetery, and he has ended up falling asleep at the cemetery, I think, or the library or something like that. He always tries to get home in time before it gets dark, before the sun drops, because that's when these creatures come out. In this particular part of the book, he has gone out and he's far from home, and he ends up falling asleep. Is that right? No, maybe that's not right. But I do remember that time gets away from him, and he keeps checking his watch to make sure that he's still got plenty of time. And he realizes at some point during this part of the book that his watch has stopped, and it's much later than he thought it was. And just the way Richard Matheson set this up in the book was masterful. So the protagonist, he jumps in this, I think it's a station wagon he's driving around, and he is racing back home to try to get indoors where he'll be safe before these things start waking up and coming out. And the sun drops, and he gets onto his street, and they're already like rushing out from all sides. And he's trying to get into his house, and I just remember sweating bullets, wondering how in the world is the protagonist going to get into his house safe with this going on. And it was just so intense. I was gripping the book like crazy, and my heart was pounding, and it was just like I was there. It was like I was right there experiencing this terror, and it was better than any movie. So anyway, when they made I Am Legend into that movie, has been made 3 times, by the way. It was made with Vincent Price, it was made with Charlton Heston, and then finally it was made with Will Smith a few years ago. I was so looking forward to it, and my goodness, they ruined the source material. The whole reason that the book is called I Am Legend, totally ignored, totally ruined it. It was like they took a masterful work of art and just turned it into a bubblegum pop crap. So that was same way with this Foundation by Isaac Asimov. They totally missed the mark, totally leaving out what makes Foundation such an incredible master work. But anyway, I wanted to share this quote for you from the book. It goes like this. Let me kind of set up the story. In Foundation, this genius mathematician figures out, by studying what they call psycho mathematics or psychohistory or something like that, studying and eliminating all possibilities and leaving only the possibilities that can exist, determines exactly what the future holds for this galactic empire. So he's able to foretell thousands and thousands and thousands of years in the future exactly how things are going to play out. And so there's a point in the book where he's talking to somebody else, and they're asking him if these eventualities can be prevented. And he says this: the psychohistoric trend of a planet full of people contains a huge inertia. And I just love that word, inertia. Think about it. The trend, the psychological trend of a planet full of people contains a huge inertia. To be changed, it must be met with something possessing a similar inertia. Either as many people must be concerned, or, if the number of people be relatively small, enormous time for change must be allowed. That's a quote from Foundation by Isaac Asimov. Now here's what that made me think. It made me think of people who reach out to me and talk about changing the world and preventing people from developing borderline personality disorder and these sorts of things at all. We're talking about enormous inertia. Society and these things getting passed down through generations and generations and generations, there's a certain inertia that guarantees that these things will continue happening. Children will continue being raised this way. People will continue suffering from borderline personality disorder and from other emotional disorders because of this huge inertia. It's just the direction psychologically that the world has been going in for a long, long time. And like Isaac Asimov says here, to be changed, it has to be met with something possessing a similar inertia. Either as many people must be concerned, or if the number of people be relatively small, enormous time for change must be allowed. And as a God-fearing person, I just think that the only real change, that equal inertia that will have to bring about that type of a change, it'll have to originate from the only person who has that type of power. My daughter's on an online school on the internet, and the reason she is this year and not in a public school is not due to COVID or anything like that. It's due to being bilingual. Not wanting her Spanish skills to weaken or anything like that. So she's in a Spanish-English bilingual school online, and every once in a while I'll sit around her when she's in this school, and because it's online, she can do school anywhere she can plug in a computer. And one thing I noticed that similar to last year is it seems like, so last year she was in kindergarten, and this year she's in first grade. It seems like there's always one or two students in the class who, on the very first day of school, when teacher hops on there, you hear the student saying, "I love you, teacher. I love you so much. Teacher, I love you." They ain't known the teacher but for an hour. And this is the type of things they're expressing to a complete stranger. Literally begging for the teacher to say it back to them. That's why they're saying it. "I love you, teacher. I love you so much." What they're really fishing for is for the teacher to say, "Oh, okay, I love you too." And like I say, this is something I observed not just this year, but last year. There's always that one student, maybe two students in the class that does this. And it breaks my heart, because it's so out of place. And it's not a desperation reflected by most of the other children. On the surface, I think most people who are not as focused on these types of things as I am might look at that and see something normal and sweet. That's just normal child behavior. But I don't see anything sweet about it. What I see instead is I see an insecure child who is starving for the security of being seen and of being seen as lovable. They're begging for that sense of security and assurance that they are lovable. And you have to ask yourself where this begging and insecurity and uncertainty about their lovableness is being born from in the first place. Clearly, they are not getting the sense of security and assurance from their parents at home. That's the sad thing about it. And most of you and I know what this means is really waiting for them down the road, as far as long-term emotional issues go. And how this means that their lives are likely to be for many decades into the future, probably all the way up into adulthood and beyond if they don't find the motivation to investigate that and change it. So anyway, I just thought I'd share that with you. That's an observation I've made this year that kind of breaks my heart. And a child who, think about this, a child who is secure in the fact that they are lovable because their home life provides them with that assurance. They don't go on to beg people to extend them some kind of assurance that they're lovable out, in school and stuff like that. These are kids in the first grade meeting this person for the first time in their life, and what the very first thing they say, "I love you, teacher. I love you so much." Just basically, the message there is, please, teacher, say that you love me too. Say that you love me. Please, teacher, say that you love me. That's what that is. Here's a message I got this week. Hello, Brian. Hope you're having a great Monday. I had a really great revelation last night that I wanted to share with you. Ever since I had my son, I felt really disconnected with him. I never felt that I could love him or that I was capable of doing so. I know that sounds horrible. And, I want to stop right here and say that just admitting that is evidence of great progress. That a person would even admit something that they think is so terrible that probably for years they've been denying it all. No, I don't feel that way. I don't feel that way. You can't fix what you won't accept is a reality, or that is there. You can't fix it. You can't address it, can't analyze it, can't fix it. So the fact that this person is taking something that could potentially be so shameful to the person that they would never admit it to another person, the fact that they're just willing to speak about it honestly, huge positive thing. So the person says, I know that sounds horrible, but I could never figure out why I felt that way. I always thought there was something terribly wrong with me, and I was truly ashamed with it. I thought it was postpartum until last night. I realized that because I could not love myself, I couldn't genuinely love my son. There was a part of me that felt like I hated him. I think it was because I saw so much of me in him. As I've been learning from your podcasts and the fundamentals course, it has really changed my perspective about everything. The shame I used to feel is dissipating as my behavior is changing toward him. And every day I feel a little closer to him. Last night I was admiring him while he was sleeping and thinking about how lucky I am to have him. I never thought I would be able to feel that way. I feel like I'm on the way to giving him the love that he has always deserved. I know I'm not finished. I haven't finished my journey yet, but I am beyond amazed by my progress that I have gotten with the right information and direction. I know I sound like a broken record, but thank you. You have changed my life in such a way that I have a hard time putting into words how grateful I am. Well, I know that feeling because I felt pretty grateful once I stumbled onto some real insights and things that began to really give me direction too, as far as authentically ridding myself of the root causes of these things. So I appreciate that, but really, the person who wrote this, that's the person doing the work, and that person should be very, very proud of herself. So it's true that our capacity to experience real love and compassion towards anybody else is directly proportional to how well we experience love and compassion toward our own selves. That might be worth writing down. Our capacity to experience real love and compassion toward anybody else is directly proportional to how well we experience love and compassion toward ourselves. So it's no small thing, learning to love ourselves. False dilemma. You ever heard the word? Sometimes it's referred to as a false dichotomy. What is it? It's a fallacy. It's a logical fallacy that erroneously limits what options are available. I'll give you an example. It'd be like me saying, well, this car won't go over 50 miles an hour. Since it won't go over 50 miles an hour, this can only be because the people who made the car don't know how to make a car go over 50 miles an hour, or because there's too much wind coming in the opposite direction. It can only be one thing or the other. Well, the reason why it's a false dilemma is because it completely fails to consider other equally probable possibilities. For example, another possibility the car won't go over 50 miles an hour is that you're not pushing down on the gas enough, right? That's another possibility. But what the person has done is that they have closed themselves in a box rationally and said, these are the only two possibilities that exist. It's either got to be one or the other. And by doing this, do you see how they've closed themselves off from even allowing their mind to explore additional explanations for why that car might not go over 50 miles per hour. And so they're very, it's a very narrow way of looking at a problem. Very illogical. So here's what just some of the things that Wikipedia has to say about this. It's based on a premise that erroneously limits what options are available. So it creates a false premise altogether. The whole premise of the thing is false. It asserts that one among a number of alternatives must be true. This is problematic because it oversimplifies the choice by excluding other viable alternatives. For example, a false dilemma is committed when it is claimed that Stacy spoke out against capitalism, therefore she must be a communist. One of the options excluded is that Stacy might neither be a communist nor a capitalist. Yeah, there are other possibilities. False dilemmas often have the form of treating two contraries, which may both be false, as contradictories, of which one is necessarily true, from the person creating the false dilemma, that is. So this made me think about Neil deGrasse Tyson. I think in an episode not too long back, I said that I wasn't a big fan of his, but he kind of won me over because I realized that he's a person that he's at least open to considering some things that I didn't think he'd be open to considering before. But when he was asked about whether or not he believes in God, he said this, and see if you can catch the false dilemma reasoning that this supposedly brilliant man has locked himself into. So what he says is that from what he understands about God, God is all powerful and he's all good. Now that's not the false dilemma. But deGrasse Tyson then mentioned some large-scale tragedies that have happened to religious people. So he goes back in history, he says, these were people who claimed to be very religious, and these awful tragedies happened to them. This is when he commits the false dilemma. He says, the only thing this can mean is that God is either not all-powerful or he's not all good. That's the false dilemma. Tyson has created only two possibilities here, so he's locked his brain into that. Now, because his brain is locked onto that, he's not even willing to consider that there might be other explanations for it. But he locks himself onto that. God is either not all-powerful because these tragedies have happened, or he's not all good because these tragedies have happened. Therefore, there's no God. But is this really the only thing Are these really the only two explanations for why bad things happen to good people? Is there really no other explanation that anybody can come up with? Well, I know why good things happen. I know why bad things happen to good people. And I'm not going to get into it here today because I don't want to be I don't want to turn this into a religious talk. But let me give you an example just to kind of roughly illustrate the thing. Think about a teacher or a parent. Personally, I can talk about this as a father, and I can talk about it as a teacher. Are there no other explanations for me sitting back and allowing things to happen with my daughter, for example, or allowing a student, for example, to explore a line of reasoning that I absolutely know is off the mark, it's totally false, but is there any reasonable explanation for why I might allow something like that to go on? As a parent, is there any reasonable explanation for why my daughter might come to me and say, Daddy, I want to do something this way? And I say, well, honey, that's not the way to do it. And she says, no, I want to do it that way. I know it. I know it's the right way to do it. Is there any explanation you can think of for why I might say, all right, do it that way? Even if I know she's going to skin her knee or bump herself, or that the result is not going to turn out well. Are the only two explanations for why I would sit back and allow that to go ahead and play itself out are the only two explanations that I can't stop her from doing it, and that if I don't stop her, if I can stop her but I don't, I'm not good? Those clearly are not the only two explanations for why a teacher or a wiser person might sit back and allow a thing to play out. Especially if that person in authority or the person in power knows that they have the power to completely reverse anything that might result because of allowing this thing to play out. If I know that I have the power to allow this thing to play out, and then whatever results from it, I can reverse it, I can make everything okay, then I might do that. It's a good way to let people learn for themselves, isn't it? It's a good way to allow my daughter to experience something and come to some conclusions for herself about the ultimate best way to do that. And maybe later then she will, when she says, no, Daddy, I know how to do it better than you, maybe she'll rethink that, won't she? Maybe she'll say, well, that didn't work out too good last time. I'm going to trust that Daddy knows what's best for me. So, false dilemmas, something interesting to think about. Neil deGrasse Tyson, one of the smartest people, celebrated people in media, is not immune to committing a false dilemma. He did it right here when he was talking about God. Bad things happen to good people, and the only thing that can mean is that God's either not all powerful or he's not all good. Totally fails to consider any other explanations or reasonable explanations for why God can be all powerful, he can be all good, and might still allow certain things to happen. All right, moving on. Geodesics. I promised we'd talk about that. Do you know what that is? That is straight paths on a curved surface. So think about, if you're flying through the sky on Earth, are you flying in a directly straight line? No, because if you did, you would end up in outer space. So geodesics, straight paths on a curved surface, is like the lines drawn on a globe. And when a plane flies around the Earth, even if it's flying perfectly straight on that globe, it's actually flying in a curve, isn't it? Because it's following the curvature of the Earth. Now here's what I found interesting. I don't remember where I got this. I think it was from some YouTube channel. says matter tells space-time how to curve. Think about that. Matter, this pencil, tells space-time how to curve. And space-time tells matter how to move. Matter tells space-time how to curve, and space-time tells matter how to move. Another interesting thing about this, which I wish I could remember where I got this, but gravitational fields. You ever hear that term, gravitational fields? Doesn't exist. There's no such thing as a gravitational field. There's only acceleration or falling. Me sitting here recording this episode of Last Symptom podcast right now, I am falling. What's stopping me? The ground is stopping me. That's what gravity is. My body is trying to fall. The chair and the ground is stopping me from falling. In curved space-time, and try to wrap your brain around this, you have to accelerate just to stand still. So me sitting here right now recording this show, which I think of as sitting still, I'm still accelerating. I'm accelerating just to be able to sit here and do this. All right, let's talk about getting to know yourself. You know, this comes from thinking that we know a thing well, but then realizing that we're really strangers to the thing more than we think until we begin to examine and learn more about it. I've said in the past that therapy is learning intimacy. Excuse me, I got the burps. Therapy is learning intimacy with oneself. So I remember when I started going through my own authentic recovery, people would say, you know, you got to learn about yourself. You got to get to know yourself. You've never gotten to know yourself in a real way. And I thought, that's absurd. I'm me. I am me. Who knows me better than I know me? But here's the thing. I didn't really know me. I thought I knew me, but thinking I know myself and really knowing myself, two different things. So when the whole process, that whole 7 years of authentically recovering from borderline personality disorder was a great big marathon of getting to know myself for real. Not who I think I am, but who I am for real. Getting to really know myself. You know, it means digging below the surface and understanding yourself better than anybody else does or ever has. So, till now, you know, maybe you've believed that you do know yourself because you're you. But there are many things you only know about yourself superficially, that is, on the surface, or inaccurately. There's things you probably think you know about yourself. You don't really know those things because you never have stopped to understand where that comes from. Like, why do you do the things that you do? Or why do you feel the way you do about that certain thing? And that made me think about water. How, there's nothing that you have consumed more in your entire life than water. And yet, how well do you really know water? So one thing I kind of like to do is from time to time I will take just the most common thing that I can think of and I will research it to see how much I really know that thing. And I never cease to be surprised with the things I come up with. The information and the insights that I gain from just deciding to look up some totally normal thing that is featured in every day of my every life, and seeing what I can find about it. So, water. What do you know about it? Well, here's some interesting things. It's the only common substance to exist as a solid, liquid, and gas in normal terrestrial conditions. Did you know that? It's the only common substance that surrounds you that in just natural conditions can exist as all of those things, a solid, liquid, and a gas. In a lake or an ocean, water at 4 degrees Celsius, that is 39.2 degrees Fahrenheit, sinks to the bottom. Now, why is that important? Think about a lake or an ocean. Temperature drops down to 39.2 degrees Fahrenheit or 4 degrees Celsius. Now that water, that water that has reached that temperature sinks down to the bottom of the body of water. And what happens after that? Ice forms on the surface of that body of water. And the ice floats on the liquid water. The ice insulates the water below, preventing it from freezing solid. So the water that has sank now is insulated by the ice on top. It won't freeze. Why is that important? It's important because if that weren't to happen, most everything that lives in water would perish during the winter. Did you know that? Did you know that freezing bodies of water behave that way in order to preserve alive the life within them? Do you know what the boiling point of water is at sea level? Did you know that it's different at sea level than if you're up on a mountain? At sea level, the boiling point of water is 212 degrees Fahrenheit. That's 100 degrees Celsius. But as atmospheric pressure decreases with altitude, so let's say you're a backpacker like me, you're carrying your water with you, and you've just climbed a mountain, so now you're up at a high altitude. The boiling point decreases by 1 degree Celsius every 274 meters. In other words, high altitude cooking, if you're up on a mountain trying to cook your meal that night, it takes longer than sea level cooking. For example, at 5,000 feet or 1,524 meters, cooking time must be increased by a fourth to achieve the same desired result. Isn't that interesting? Do you know what happens with water in a vacuum? In a vacuum, water will boil at room temperature. So some interesting things there about water. Saw a real good movie here recently called Pig, P-I-G, and it starred Nicolas Cage. I think he's doing some really interesting projects lately. He's kind of reinvented himself from the 90s. So it's a movie about elegant cooking, chefs, and really high scale cooking and that sort of thing. And at one point, Nicolas Cage's character is talking to this guy who was a student of his at one point, and the guy did not go into the line of work that Nicolas Cage knew that was his real passion. Instead, he had opened up this restaurant and was trying to win over critics and stuff like that. And Nicolas Cage had this to say. Nicolas Cage's character, I should say, had this to say. And I think it's important to think about you who listen to this show for reasons related to emotional health. Nicolas Cage's character says to the other character, "They're not real." You get that, right? None of it is real. The critics aren't real. The customers aren't real. Because this isn't real. You aren't real. Derek, why do you care about these people? They don't care about you. None of them. They don't even know you because you haven't shown them. Every day you will wake up and there will be less of you. You live your life for them, and they don't even see you. You don't even see yourself. And isn't that really a recurrent theme here on The Last Symptom? It's talking about how it's a moving away from placing unhealthy value on external things instead of valuing inner things, right? The idea here is that this chef, nobody knows who he is. If they like him, they're not liking him. They're instead liking this totally false impression that he is trying to weave of himself, right? And so therefore it's worthless. Any accolades or anything like that, totally worthless, because it's all based on a lie. They're not seeing him. He's not seeing him. He hasn't shown them him. And every day he wakes up, there's less of him. Living life for a totally pointless and valueless purpose and motivation. Sam Shumard was the name of the guy who had the beer drinking glove that I always tell you about. He'd come into the monument company and just tell stories, and my goodness, crack me up. One more story I'll tell you about Sam Shumard. Come in with his beer drinking glove. He told me a story of being on a boat. He was probably close to 70 years old at this time. And I said that another boat passed and had these young hotties on there, he said. And they said, "Hey," and they're yelling at him and everything. He said, "Hi." He'd probably stand on that boat with his beer drinking glove. And he's talked about how they flashed their boobs at him. And I never saw an old man smile so big when he told that story. I thought, man, what a lucky guy. But Sam Shumard, guy with the beer drinking glove, talking to my next door neighbor here last couple weeks, and I started telling stories about old Sam, and I said, well, you probably know him. And he said, I sure do. Sam Shumard. He said he just died 3 weeks ago. So the irony of that I was going for so long, and here I just have thought so good of Sam over the years. Me getting into a conversation with my neighbor, and he said, yes, Sam just died just 3 weeks ago. Like I say, back in, 97, 96, I think Sam was already pushing 70. So he must have been really up there when he died, if he just died just 3 weeks ago. But my neighbor did know him, was able to tell me some details about that, and that was nice. I kind of wish that I had known that Sam was still alive. I would have gone and seen him. Here's a good question I got not too long ago. Somebody said, if people are like the weather, why should we be concerned if others think they're happy but they're not? This was based on an Orange Slash video, these brief video insight episodes that I do, where I had talked about people thinking they're happy but they're not. So the person said, what is that of any concern to me? Why should I even be observing that or thinking about that? And the person said, isn't our recovery dependent on our own belief in inherent worth? Why is other people's happiness or their incorrect perspective of their own happiness any of our concern? So I really appreciated that feedback. I really appreciated getting an opportunity to address that question. Now, here's the thing. It's true that people are the weather to us. And it's also true that worrying about how other people live their lives isn't constructive. So I don't look at it like my neighbor or my brother, my parents. I don't look at anybody and worry about how they're living their lives. I look at it non-judgmentally. Just like, well, that's the way they're living their life. Okay, I respect that. It's a total waste of energy and attention to be worrying about how other people are living their lives. But that's only true in the sense of involving ourselves with what is not ours to involve ourselves with. There are two ways to observe a thing. I don't know if you knew that or not, but there are two ways to observe a thing. One is judgmentally. Now, here's the interesting thing about people who observe judgmentally. Do you know why they observe judgmentally? They do so because it's a way to avoid looking inward. Think about that. Observing judgmentally, observing other people and their lives and their choices judgmentally is a way to avoid looking inward. That's why there's so many hypocrites, especially like religious folks. There's so tendency there to be so judgmental about how other people are living. Then it's no surprise, is it, when later it turns out that they're the dirty, cheating skunk, or they're the person who's cheating on their income tax, or they're the person who is molesting children, or they're the person who is doing whatever, who lied or stole or did whatever. Because people who observe judgmentally do this as a way to avoid looking inward, honestly, with the interest of correcting whatever's there. The second way to observe a thing is non-judgmentally. And this type of observing is to take what we see and what we observe and then take that and use it to look inward and understand ourselves as human beings better. So, the example I told on this orange slice was that in Arizona, when I went into my own intensive program, not my intensive program, but an intensive program there, they sent me out to this farm, and there were these other people there and horses. And they got us all out there with the horses, and they said, well, what we would like you to do is we would like you to round up these horses and get them into their stalls there. She says, what I want you to do is I want you all to work together to do this and get these horses into their stall. So I just sat back for a second. I just watched these other fellas, there's guys and girls both there, different ages, different culture, different races, different cultures, but I watched them working together to try to round up these horses. And now I had some experience growing up with horses, but I can't say that I was, I'm a horse whisperer or anything like that. But what I did was I just watched them. And after a while, it occurred to me, I started thinking, what they're doing by going up to the horses and stuff like this is just pushing them away. The horses just want to get away. And I thought to myself, but what would you do if you were going to feed these horses? They would probably know just by opening the gate that it was feeding time to these stalls. So I looked over, and sure enough, all the gates were closed. Mind you, I was not participating with the group of people, the other people who were there. I was just observing them and trying to figure out what they were doing wrong, why it wasn't working for them. So I went over, popped the latch off the gate, pulled the door, swung the door wide open, and would you believe that those horses dropped everything, every one of them, and come over and they corralled themselves in that stall. The therapist, the horse therapist, as she was called, was kind of gobsmacked. And she's just like, how did you know to do that? You must have grown up around horses. It wasn't that. I did grow up around horses, but even though I didn't know horses all that well. Now here's the thing about that. I was observing the other people, but was I observing them judgmentally? Was I standing there going, man, these bunch of idiots, look how stupid they are. Walk around doing this completely pointless exercise, and no, there was no judgment at all. I wasn't observing them to pass judgment on them. Instead, I was studying, observing, and learning. So getting healthy and staying healthy requires understanding not only yourself, but people in general. If you and I were fish, well, then our lives would benefit from observing and understanding the nature of fish and fish psychology. But we ain't fish, we're people. So to understand the nature of people better, which is what we are, we're people. So understanding the nature of people and people psychology in general helps us understand ourselves better, to identify and correct things about ourselves that we recognize in other people, or to recognize and completely avoid aspects of behavior and thinking that we recognize in other people. So it's non-judgmental. As far as whether people are happy or they just think they're happy, not being a concern of yours, well, you're right that it's no concern of yours in the sense that you can't live their lives for them, and you shouldn't even be trying. But it is a concern of yours in that whatever unhealthy behaviors and thinking we observe in others is educational, and it gives us the opportunity to analyze ourselves, to identify and correct similar patterns with ourselves, or to avoid adopting those things altogether. Ultimatum versus boundaries. What's the purpose of an ultimatum? The purpose of an ultimatum is to provoke an action from the other party. So in other words, it's like, if you don't do this, then I'm going to do this. Or it could be, if you dare do this, then this is what I'm going to do as a direct response. So you got that, that's an ultimatum. Now what's the purpose of boundaries? The purpose of boundaries is not what we just described. The purpose of boundaries is to leave other people's decisions entirely up to them, but to make decisions for ourselves. So it's sort of like this. A boundary is like this. This is what I'm going to make my life like, no matter what you do. So here's the image in my head of what I want my life to be like. I'm going to make it happen no matter what you do. But it's up to you whether or not you will harmonize with and complement that vision. If you don't do what's necessary to harmonize and complement that vision of what I'm going to do no matter what, then you won't be allowed in, because my life can't be the way I want it to be if I'm just allowing just any old sort of element or influence in. So do you see the difference? Boundaries is not an ultimatum. An ultimatum is, if you do this, then I will do this to punish you for what you did. Or, if you don't do this, then I'm going to do this. So, if you don't take my car to get the oil changed, then I am going to set fire to all the underwear in your underwear drawer. That's an ultimatum. Boundaries is not an ultimatum. Boundaries is, you know what, I'm analyzing my life, and here's what I've decided it needs to be like. And because it's my life, I can make any decision I want about it. So here's what I have decided my life is going to look like. It is going to look like that. I don't care what you do. You can walk on your hands, juggle balls around the house, cut off all your hair. I don't care what you do. But if you don't fit, if what you do, the decisions you make for yourself, don't contribute to what I'm going to make my life look like, you won't be allowed in. That is boundaries. Confirmations. A lot of times when we're unhealthy, we look at our lives and we see confirmations all over the place just about how crappy we are and stuff like that. But then when you start going through recovery, you start to realize that all these confirmations weren't real confirmations at all. You were just interpreting them that way. You were interpreting them through that lens. So if I think I'm a terrible person, I really believe that about myself, and a child walks up to me in the park and says, "You're ugly, mister," I go, well, there you go. Of course I'm ugly, and I'm terrible, and this child walking up to me out of the blue and saying that is just confirmation of it. But is it confirmation of that? No, it's confirmation that child is a little punk, but it ain't a confirmation of anything involving you. Do you know why I get so angry every time I call customer service for anything? When I'm getting on the phone to call customer service, I ain't angry because of anything they've said to me, because they haven't had time to say anything to me yet. The reason I'm angry when I start a call with customer service is because my perspective or attitude going into the process is that I already know that they're going to be unhelpful idiots. So I'm making the phone call with that as my working premise before the phone rep and I have ever even traded a single word. Does this affect my tone of voice and approach? It sure does. Does this put the phone rep on the defense immediately? It sure does. Does it usually result in a combative phone call with the phone rep being an unhelpful idiot? It sure does. So is my perspective and attitude creating a self-fulfilling prophecy before I've ever dialed them up on my phone? I would say 99.999% of the time, probably yes. But when the phone rep is an unhelpful idiot, this enrages me even more. Why? Because what made me loathe making that phone call in the first place has now actually played out. But what happens when I check myself before making the call and I say to myself, Brian, you have never talked to this person before in your life. This is a blank slate. So you can't go at them as if you already know them. You gotta allow for them to prove for themselves if they are unhelpful idiots or not. You know, on the merits of this phone call, stand alone. Your previous experiences has no defining power over this particular experience whatsoever. The two aren't related. Well, usually what happens is that the phone rep ends up being extremely pleasant and overwhelmingly helpful. It takes a lot of work to question our perspectives, to keep them in check, and do some experiments to see if we aren't interpreting things completely inaccurately and therefore not getting the actual results we believe we're getting at all. So the confirmations in your life have almost certainly only been confirmations because of an incorrect interpretation and expectation going in to each experience. So it's useful to revisit those confirmations. Imagine how you might have interpreted them differently and more positively if instead of believing you're devoid of worth, of inherent worth, that is, instead of believing you're a piece of dung, you instead had approached those experiences with the certainty that you are not a piece of dung, that your worth is an inherent part of being you, and that anything or anybody who suggests otherwise is reflecting a truth about themselves but not about you. This exercise, with time, can help you convince yourself once and for all that your worth is a real thing and that the opposite has never been confirmed for real. Now it's time for the campfire story, my lucid dream. Do you know what a lucid dream is, first of all? A lucid dream is a dream where you realize you are dreaming. It's not like in the middle of the dream you kind of suspect you might be dreaming, or that within the dream you think, hey, is this a dream? In kind of like this superficial type of way. No, a lucid dream is when you know for a fact that you are dreaming. And because you realize you're dreaming, you now have in full control over the dream. That's a lucid dream. when this happened to me, I lived in an apartment. And this happened maybe a year before I married my ex-wife, Diana. I was in my apartment, and in the dream starts like this. I'm in a room with a bunch of people in a house that my family really lived in when I was about 3 years old. So that's the setting for the dream. And I remember that I was in this room with all these people from my past. So all these people from like back in the late 70s and early 80s, they were all in this house that I had grown up in. And we were having some kind of get-together or something. We were all in there talking, people sitting on the couches and the chairs. And there was food being served in the other room, in the kitchen. Paper plates, all that. And I was observing them, interacting with them and everything like that. And as we were all talking, I heard the sound of a lawnmower. You know, the sound of a lawnmower. At first I ignored it, and this is before I realized I was in a dream. And so I'm just interacting with these people that's in the background, and it's getting louder and louder. It gets so loud that in the dream, I stop, and I'm looking around, and I realize that nobody else in the room seems to be irritated by this sound. So in the dream, I said to the characters in the dream, I said, "You guys hear that? Who is mowing out there?" And they said, "Well, we don't hear anything." I said, "You gotta be kidding me. That it's so loud. I mean, it sounded like it was right there next to me." Still, I don't realize I'm in a dream. I walk out the front door of this house. By the way, my brain had recreated this house from when I was 3, like down to the last detail. It was incredible. Haven't seen that house since I was probably 3 or 4, and it created it down to the last detail. So I leave everybody there, and I walk out the front door. I was not 3 or 4, by the way, in the dream. I was my own grown self, whatever age I was at the time I had the dream. So I walk out the front door, walk down the front steps. I expected when I walked out the front door to see somebody out there mowing, and there was nobody. So I walked down the front steps, down to the end of the sidewalk, and I looked down one end of the block. Nobody. All the yards are empty. I looked down the other side. Nobody. All the yards are empty. And yet the sound of the lawnmower is still going on. It's loud now. It's like it's right there, but I can't find the source of the sound of the lawnmower. So I walked around, all the way around this house in my dream, trying to find this lawnmower. Couldn't find it. Got around back to the front, and I'm standing there, listening to this lawnmower. And that is when the dream turned from being just a normal dream to being a lucid dream, because in that instant, I realized this isn't real. All of my surroundings right now, where I'm at, is not real. And the memory of where I was for real come back to me. I remembered that I had sat down on my couch in my apartment to do some drawing. I had my clipboard on my lap. I had sat down. I was drawing. I stuck my pencil in my front shirt pocket, and I had leaned my head down on my hand, like on the palm of my hand, to think about what I was going to draw next, and that was the last thing I remembered. And now here I am in this world, on this bright blue day, in this dream world, and I realize that in real life, I'm sitting in my apartment. I'm sitting in my apartment on my couch with that clipboard on my chest, and I'm leaned down on one hand, my head down on one hand, like cupping my head, and I've fallen asleep there. I knew without a doubt that is where my real body was in the real world, and I didn't wake up. You would think that once I realized that, I would have just woke up, but I didn't. And I stood there looking around at this dream world, knowing exactly where I was in real life and that this was all a dream. It was trippy, man. I mean, it was wild. It was a wild realization. When I realized this, I turned around and I looked at this house and I realized, my God, the last time I saw this house, I was like 3 years old, and I'm looking at the details of the house that my brain has created. It's totally recreated this house, and just the details of it. Everything, cracks in the driveway, the cracks in the sidewalk, everything like that. It was all there, and I was just astonished. And I walked back up the steps, and I'm like, I can even remember holding the side rail, of the steps, feeling it in my hand and knowing it's not even real. It's not there. But I'm looking at it, I'm feeling it, I can feel it in my hand, and at the same time I can hear the guy mowing grass right outside my apartment. That's what I realized, by the way. That was the whole giveaway thing. I realized that the landscaper is right outside my window, that my body is sitting on my couch, and that right outside my window, that the landscaper is mowing grass right outside my window there, but I'm still asleep. I walk into the house where I was just with these people, for this party or this get together. And I walk in there looking at them just in this haze of amazement. And I'm paying attention to how I haven't seen some of these people in 20, 30 years, and yet my brain has recreated them exactly the way they were. Their voices sound, exactly the way they were. Their mannerisms, exactly the way they really were. The hairs on their head, I remember looking at the hair on their head. And there were individual strands. It was not like, some kind of blurry video game or anything like that. Now, my brain had recreated every detail. And finally somebody says, "You look like you saw ghosts. What's going on?" And I said, none of you can hear that lawnmower out there. None of them could. Now I'm realizing the whole thing, everything, these people are not real people. None of this is real. And they're talking to me, and finally I just told them, none of you are real. And I'm looking at them like I know this for a fact, right? So I'm no longer working with the assumption that these are real people or that I'm worried about offending them or anything like that. I know they're not real. But they're still, the characters in the dream are still acting out their part. And when I said, none of you are real, they started kind of like laughing kind of nervously, and no, we're real. We're as real as you. No, none of you are real. And so I said, watch this. I'll make, I don't remember who it was, but somebody was standing there with a like a teacup and a tea plate. What do you call that? The little delicate plate you set your teacup on. I think it was coffee though instead of tea. And I said, watch this. I'll make her spill her tea. And I just willed it, and she did. She spilled her tea. And everybody looked at me like, I didn't reach out to her and grab her, touch her or anything like that. I just willed it within myself. I just willed for that to happen. And it did happen. And then everybody had this kind of terrified look on their face. Like, oh my gosh, are we not really real? And then I remember I looked at this other guy. He's sitting on the couch. And I just willed him to pee his pants. For real. And instantly, this big wet spot appeared on his pants and on the couch. And when that happened, everybody in the room got dead quiet. And the characters in the dream were like, holy crap, this is for real. We're only in a dream. That was so weird. Then what I did was I turned around knowing that these people weren't real. I didn't feel like I had to, play the thing out anymore, or, worry about hurting anybody's feelings or anything because they weren't real. I walked out, walked down those steps again, and there was traffic coming down the street. I didn't do it like a superhero. I didn't stretch out my hand, do anything dramatic like that. I just willed the traffic to stop. And the stream of traffic just froze. Just froze in place. I didn't have to do anything. I just had to will it. And the cars froze. The stream of traffic just instantly, it wasn't like they screeched to a halt or anything like that. They just stopped. And I weaved myself through these cars, and as I did, I looked at the cars and the people in the cars. I had not froze the people in the cars. I just froze the cars themselves. So the people inside the cars were looking at me. I mean, I could see the people in there. But I was looking at the details of these cars, and they were all from like the 70s. And I mean, I could see the chrome, I could see the paint job, I could see the lines in the cars, and it was just incredible what my brain had created. Got onto the other side of the street, and then I just willed the traffic to resume, and it did. It wasn't like, they started off real hard or anything like that again. It's just like they continued right where they left off. They just kept going. When I got across the other side of the street, there was a field there with some trees and stuff. And I was looking around at this dream world, at the sky. I was looking at the clouds. I was looking at the trees. The leaves on the trees were kind of like fluttering with the breeze, and I could feel the breeze in the dream. And I just thought, this is unbelievable. Nobody's ever going to believe this. But I'm looking at the leaves, and they've got the lines in the leaves, the veins, every detail. And they're just kind of fluttering with the breeze, and I can feel it on my skin. And there were some birds flying through. When I come close to this one tree, it kind of spooked the birds, and the birds kind of flew out of the tree. And instantly, I willed the birds to freeze. I willed them to stop. They froze in midair. Now, that is not the craziest part of this. They froze in midair so that I was able to walk under them and around them and examine them while they're frozen in midair in my dream. The wildest part about it is that, again, these are not like Atari birds. These birds were full detail. I was looking at them in the dream. I was examining their wings, the individual, the feathers on the birds, the individual strands of these feathers. Every detail was in there, I'm telling you. Their eyes, their beak, the variations of color and everything was on these birds. But the most impressive thing about that for me, and I probably today still, of the whole thing, the detail in the feathers of these birds that I had froze into place, and that I was stood there and examined, because I was in amazement. I know this is a dream. I know that none of this is real, and yet there it is. This bird frozen in midair, and every detail in the feathers is there, even imperfections and stuff like that. My brain had created it all. And then, after I'd examined this bird thoroughly and looked around and just like in total amazement, the whole thing was just total amazement. I willed the birds to continue flying, and they just kept on, like they had never stopped at all. Their flight just continued right from where they had left off. I played around with this, knowing that I was in a lucid dream. I played around with this, what probably seemed like a half hour to me, I reckon, in the dream. If you saw the movie Inception, lucid dreams are true to that. Like, time passes differently. So where I might have spent like a half hour in the dream, probably only 5 minutes or so went by in the real world. And I remember at one point where I got tired of kind of like experimenting with all these, the power that I had within this lucid dream. I realized it can't go on forever. And I realized that the last thing I wanted to do with this power in this lucid dream was to wake myself up And I knew, I'm telling you, I knew exactly where I was in the real world. I knew I was sitting on that couch with my legs kicked up on the coffee table, with my left hand out, resting my head on my left hand, and that's the way I was sleeping. And I knew that the guy was right outside my window. The landscaper was right outside my window mowing the grass. And so once I had my fill of just, and it was not easy, by the way, deciding to end it, because even in the dream I knew this is probably never going to happen again. This is probably a once in a lifetime type of experience, this lucid dream. But there's only so much you can do with it before it just, kind of where the uniqueness and the amazement of it starts to wear off. And so what I did was, all right, I remember standing there. I've done everything I want to do here. The last thing is that I'm going to will myself to wake up, and I know exactly where I'm going to be and everything, but that this will just be the way to wrap this up. I willed myself awake, and in the dream, I stood there, and it was, I don't know what it was. It was just kind of like me standing there, and okay, this is it. And I willed it. And in the real world, my eyes popped open. I was sitting on that couch in my apartment, legs kicked up on that coffee table, exactly the way I knew I would be. Head rested in my hand. And I lifted my head and looked out the window, and there was that landscaper cutting grass right outside my window in the real world. That, I tell people that story nowadays. I forgot, I haven't told that story for a while. People have a tendency to think I'm exaggerating that or making some of that up. I'm telling you, everything I just told you is 100% true. And I've never had any dreams that come anywhere close to anything like that since then. So that would have been back in 2001, 2002, something like that, when I had that dream. But that's a true story. That's the way it really happened. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you're having a wonderful week. Thank you for hanging out with me here for a little bit. And join us over there on Locals, thelastsymptom.locals.com. thelastsymptom.locals, LOCALS.com. That's where the Last Symptom online community is these days, not on Facebook. And we've got a real nice group there. We would love to have you join us. Do something nice for yourselves this weekend, ladies and gentlemen, and I'll talk to you real soon.